reaching out from beyond the grave with stories to give you the chills. The Kool Ghoul on 66.6 Dead Air Radio. Tonight's delightfully devilish tale is about a man who's a little too absorbed in his mirror. Hey there, groovy ghoulies. It's your horrible host from the West Coast, the Kool Ghoul, coming at you from Dead Air Radio, your digital portal to the dead. Tonight's show is sponsored by riboflavin-flavored non-carbonated polyunsaturated blood. Suffering from fang aches? Try riboflavin-flavored non-carbonated polyunsaturated blood. It promotes bad breath in ghouls. Our caller has quite the nasty narrative for us. Alright, lucky number 13. You're on the air.
My name's Larissa. And I call my story Mirror, Mirror. We got one, Dean said, and pulled off onto the dusty desert road leading to a small rundown storage unit. A bright neon green poster board sign with a crude estate sale, scribbled in dry marker, had grabbed Dean's attention from the road. He was a scrappy young man in a fitted Nazareth shirt and ripped jeans who wasn't one to pass up a good sale. The swap meet had been a fat bust, and he hated going home empty-handed. Willie, Dean's nephew, sat in the passenger seat. The swap had been good to him. Eyes pinched and a broad smile across his chubby face, he counted the dollars he made helping folks load and unload their purchases with his Red Ryder wagon. "Let's see what we got," Dean said. His seatbelt already off, and the door of his blue Datsun opened before he put the truck in park. "You comin', small fry?" "I'm good," Willie said, and went back to counting his money. "Suit yourself. Looks like they got a box of comics, though." "No shit," Willie said. He stuffed his money in his pocket and fumbled at his seatbelt. "Yes, shit, and watch your mouth," said Dean. In the shade of the empty unit sat a tanned old man in an aluminum-webbed lawn chair. Next to him sat a cooler of bud and water, the mountains in the process of turning blue. The old man had spread the unit's cargo out on a fold-out table in two brittle tarps, faded from years in the sun. He dabbed the oil and sweat from his wrinkled face and waved to Dean. Dean gave a nod and went to work. He walked along the tarps, his eyes trained to pick out hidden treasures amongst the weeds of junk. He was good, too, better than most folks. His daddy, who worked swaps for a living, had taught him the skill as a child. Dean stopped halfway. Nothing but warped vinyl in egg crates, stained kitchenware, and tools who had seen better days. The sale looked to be a bust, too. The sun had reached peak height, and Dean felt the warm sweat on the back of his neck. The day was getting hotter, and they had an hour's drive in a run-down old truck and no working AC ahead of them. He'd given Willie the last water bottle, too. Probably ought to cut this short, he thought. Dean wiped his face and neck and gave the estate sale one last look. A large circular object leaned against a table leg, wrapped in a deep purple blanket and tied shut with a baling twine caught his eye. A small silver cross on a chain draped over the top. "What's this?" he asked the old man. "Dunno. $10 and it's yours," he said, and dabbed his forehead and neck. "Can I take a look?" Dean asked. The old man leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. "Knock yourself out," he said. Dean lifted the cross off the frame and set it down on the tarp. A faint electrical tingle spread from his hands throughout his body. He ignored the sensation, tugged at the twine, and pulled the cloth aside to reveal a large mirror. Its frame was cherry wood, hand-carved with a Western theme. Two crossed pistols sat atop the mirror. The smoke from their barrels fed into a stampede of horses, whose dust trails became the clouds in the sky of a carriage robbery. The frame looked new and polished, but the mirror had a thick layer of dust. He had never been one for lavish decorations. In fact, the only decorations in the house were the wall of vinyl album covers he collected over the years, and the framed band flyers he had pulled off the telephone poles in his youth. The mirror was different. He traced a finger over the intricate details carved into the wood and admired the craft and care. How the artists had used the swirls of color in the cherry wood to draw your eyes through each scene. Dean was lost in admiration. The world and its heat had fallen away until a stray bead of sweat ran into his eye, and the sudden sting of pain brought him back. $10? Dean asked. $10, said the old man. I'll take it, Dean said. He paid for the mirror, and Willie paid for a stack of old Spider-Man comics he'd found, missing their covers. Blackfoot set a steady rhythm for the drive home. Rough and scratched from overuse, the gentle fuzz of the tape transformed the music into white noise with a beat. Willie fell asleep by the second song. His Spider-Man comics spread across his lap. Dean thumped his hand on the outside of the cab's door to the beat of the music, the whistle of the road in one ear competing with the steady rock beat in the other. The two-lane desert road stretched to the horizon with no other cars in sight. The long, twangy whine of the harmonica signaled the start of Train, Train, and Dean began to hum along with it. He leaned back in his seat, one hand at the base of the steering wheel. He slowed the truck down to match the speed limit on the posted signs, which flew past long enough for the number to register. The weekend hadn't worked out for Dean. He barely made half the money he expected to make from the swap meet, but the season had only started, and he had plenty of opportunities to make money. Still, the trip hadn't been a total waste, he thought. His eyes drifted to the rear-view mirror. Propped against the back window, wrapped in purple cloth, and Dean's oily jacket for extra protection, sat his prize. He hadn't properly rewrapped the mirror, and part of the glass peeked through, reflecting bright bursts of sun when the light outside hit just right. The lines of the road flew past in rhythmic yellow flashes. Dean squirmed in his seat. He couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He stared out at the mirages appearing and disappearing along the hot asphalt. He tried to ignore the feeling, but the sensation grew stronger, and the jitters set in. His legs started to bounce, his muscles tensed, and he thought he'd shake the truck apart until he looked into his rearview mirror. He caved and stole a quick look. Nothing but the mirror. "You're being silly," he thought, and shook his head in amusement. Having got his fix, his legs stopped bouncing, his body relaxed, and all seemed right with the world. Dean turned into the gravel driveway to his older sister's house, ignoring the "Please Drive 5" sign they posted to minimize the dust. The Datsun slid to a stop outside the house. A wall of dust seconds behind engulfed the truck, and Willie's folks, who had come out to greet them. Deborah Lee was 10 years older than her brother, and had settled into a comfortable middle-class life with her husband Richard Lee. Her husband Richard, a good 4 years older than Deborah, stood next to her. "Christ, Dean!" Deborah said. She covered her face with her shirt until the dust settled. "Sorry about that," Dean said. He was already out of the truck and lifting Willie's Red Ryder wagon out of the back. "How was he?" she asked, while she helped Willie out of the passenger seat. "Real entrepreneur you've got there," Dean said, getting back in the truck. "That's what I want to hear," Richard said. He gave Willie a hearty pat on the back that almost caused him to drop his comics. "Hey, I gotta head out. I gotta take care of something," Dean said, and put the truck in reverse. "Hot date?" Richard asked. "Something like that," Dean said. "We got takeout, thinking you'd be staying," Deborah said. "Next time," Dean said. He waved goodbye and dove off in a cloud of dust. Dean backed into the driveway next to his small mobile home. The unshakable feeling of being watched returned. His eyes drifted from the large wooden gate that separates the driveway from the backyard, where he'd unload the truck, to the mirror propped up against the back window. Barely visible over the hood of his Datsun stood the shadowy outline of a man in a wide-brimmed hat and a heavy duster jacket. The features of his face appeared smeared, like someone had run their thumb over a wet painting. Dean looked from the mirror to the front of his truck. No one. The trailer hitch hit the wooden gate, and the Datsun jerked to a stop with a loud crack. "Ah, shit," Dean said, and put the truck in park. He slid out of the cab and checked the gate. The hitch had punched a hole between two of the boards. He'd just restained the boards last week, and now he'd have to replace two of the boards. There went what little money he'd made at the swap. He ran his hand through his hair. Today's shaped up to be a real shit show, he thought. A slow but nervous feeling crept from the base of his spine to his neck. A chill followed close behind. Dean's attention turned to the mirror in the back of his truck. He'll have to deal with the fence later. Right now he had other things on his mind. He cleared a space on the wall in his living room, right above the television, and overlooking the two worn couches covered in cigarette burns, and a pair of mismatched Afghan blankets. The mirror looked out of place between the rabbit ears covered in tinfoil and surrounded by ashtrays and empty cans. But Dean didn't care. Dean grabbed a couple of beers from the fridge and placed a TV dinner in the microwave. He cracked a beer while he watched the plastic food tray turn in the microwave. A slow, exhaustive sigh escaped his lips. The persistent fear of something he couldn't place had finally vanished. The feeling had dogged him since the estate sale, and he felt relieved at its absence. He leaned back against the door of his fridge. What a day, he thought, and took a long drink. He sat down on the couch, the TV dinner hot on his lap, and his two beers balanced on the armrest, stained from years of spilt drinks. He got comfortable and turned the TV on to the usual Springer marathon that ran every Sunday. A guilty pleasure on days he felt bad about his situation in life. Things were tough, but at least they weren't Springer tough. Night had come, and the glow of the street lamps mixed with the flicker of the TV basked the mirror in reflective blue light. Dean had fallen asleep to Springer, which had since switched to the nightly news. The two beers he drank lay next to him on the couch, his TV dinner tray fallen between his legs. Dean's head was back, his neck stretched and exposed, his mouth open. The steady drone of the newscaster warbled. The picture stretched and distorted before snapping back into place like a rubber band. Dean shifted in his sleep. The picture flickered, the newscaster's voice becoming a staccato stutter, every other word cut off. Above the TV, the mirror reflected the dimly lit room. A small ripple, like a pebble dropped into a pond, flowed from the center of the mirror to its edges and back. The TV responded with a sharp electrical beep, and the picture cut out, basking the room in darkness. The TV came back to life with deafening white noise and snow. Dean snapped awake. Fumbling for the remote that had fallen between the lumpy couch cushions, he turned the TV off and fell back onto the couch. Dean swallowed hard, trying to catch his breath and slow the beat of his heart. His eyes wandered from the TV set to the mirror and his own reflection. Deep within the reflected room of the mirror stood the silhouette of a man in a wide-brimmed hat. His shadowy body blended into the shadows on the wall. Dean's body prickled. An electrical vibration crawled over his scalp, standing his hairs on end. He stared into the mirror, unsure what to do. The figure stood still. Dean squeezed the remote in his hand and turned around, brandishing the remote like a dagger. Nothing. A cold chill ran down Dean's body. He searched the room and blindly reached for the old touch lamp which sat on the end table. He knocked away the empty cans surrounding the lamp and tapped the base twice. The light barely illuminated the room. 2 of the 4 bulbs had burned out long ago, and Dean had never bothered to replace them. He patrolled the room, remote still in hand, and worked his way through the rest of the house. He checked every window and door, all locked. A trick of the light. Or the booze, he thought, and went to bed. He didn't bother to turn off the lights. Friday night meant card night in Dean's mobile home. Deborah, Richard, and Willie arrived earlier than their usual time of 6 sharp. A week had passed, and they hadn't heard hide nor hair from Dean since he dropped Willie off after the swap meet, and this doubled as a wellness check. Dean met them at the door, unshaven and still dressed in his oily overalls from scrapping metal all day. He rubbed at his red eyes. The dark bags under them popped against the sickly pale complexion of his skin. "Jesus, Dean, you look like hell," Deborah said. "Good to see you, too," Dean said, and stepped aside to let his family in. "We couldn't find a sitter, so we brought Willie along," Richard said, and scooted his son in, who was nose to page in one of those Spider-Man comics he'd bought. "Doing some redecorating?" Richard asked, gesturing with his thumb to the bare wall above the TV. Something like that," Dean said. Deborah grabbed the trash bag propped in the corner of Dean's dining room, already half full of old dead beer cans and TV dinner trays. She picked up the empty beer cans and unopened mail littered across the fold-out poker table. "Long nights?" she said, holding up an empty bottle of Trucker's Delight caffeine pills, one of several she saw laying amongst the beer and mail. "Long scrapping days," Dean said. He tried to meet his sister's gaze, but couldn't. She furrowed her brows at her husband and gave her head a quick jerk in Dean's direction. He picked up on the not-so-subtle gesture. "Got something going on, Dean?" Richard asked, his voice soft but stern. Dean looked from his brother-in-law to his sister. He started to say something, but hesitated. Then, "You ain't gonna believe it." "I need to show you something," he said. Dean led them down the hallway to his guest room. "I've been keeping it in here," he said, and fumbled for the keys in his pocket. Dean missed the lock on the first 2 attempts, but slid the key into the door's lock on the 3rd. The room was dark, except for the faint glow of the back porch light diffused by the thick curtains drawn over the window. The mirror sat in the corner of the room, wrapped in the dark purple cloth. The silver cross hung loosely from the top of the frame. "Maybe I'm going crazy, but there's a man in the mirror," Dean said. Richard looked from the mirror to Dean. "You know how mirrors work, right?" he said. "I know, but I mean, there's another man in the mirror, like a shadow man," Dean said. "I've seen him at night moving around, but I figured it was a trick of the light or something." Willie's folks shared a look of concern. "That trucker speed ain't doing you no favors, Dean," Deborah said. "I'll prove it to you," Dean said, stuffing the silver cross in his pocket. He untied the baling twine and let the heavy cloth fall to the floor. Willie sat in the hallway reading the second issue of Spider-Man he'd brought with him, his back pressed against the door. Above him, the hallway light flickered. "What are we looking for exactly?" Richard asked. They stood in the center of the room, staring at their reflections. "The lack of sleep is causing you to hallucinate," Deborah said. "There's nothing there. Why not stay at our place for a while? You can stay on the hide-a-bed. Get a good night's sleep," she said, and squeezed Dean's arm. He ignored her, keeping his eyes on the mirror. Willie set his comic books down and pressed his ear against the door. He could hear the muffled sounds of a conversation, but he couldn't make out the words. A prickling sensation crawled from the base of his spine and over his scalp, like little needles. The hallway light continued to flicker, and Willie felt the weight of some unknowable dread fall upon him. The back porch light surged with energy. The room bathed in bright light before plunging into darkness. Deborah yelped in surprise. The air in the room felt heavy and electric. The light outside blinked back to life. The dim yellow of the porch light barely illuminated the room. Behind them, in the mirror's reflection, the inky blackness of the wall fell away to reveal the silhouette of a man in a large, wide-brimmed hat. He had no discernible features, yet they could feel his stare on the backs of their necks. A blind, wild fear filled them with the urge to run, to escape. They turned and ran toward the door, but something caught their legs and the 3 fell to the ground. Dean wheezed. The weight of some unknown force pressed on his chest, squeezing the air out of his body. Next to him, Deborah and Richard fought to breathe. She kicked, but the air caught her foot and with a painful twist of her ankle, spun her around on her back. Willie heard the sound of a commotion, followed by what sounded like someone inhaling deeply, like something sucked all the air out of the room, followed by a loud pop. He pressed his head hard against the door. His ear throbbed, but he couldn't hear anything. The room had gone silent. Willie slowly opened the door and peeked into the dark room. "Mom? Dad?" No answer. "Uncle Dean?" he said, and stepped into the room. The back porch light barely illuminated the objects inside. No parents, no uncle, only Willie, the mirror, and a dark mass hanging from the base. Curious, and unable to make out the shape in the dark, he walked closer, trying to get a better look. His mother's hand hung limp from the base of the mirror. Willie watched the last of the fingers slip into the rippling liquid surface of the glass. He screamed and ran for the door, but a sharp pain in his shoulder spun him around to face the mirror. In the reflection, the silhouette of a man in a wide-brim hat gripped Willie by the shoulder. He struggled under the shadow man, whose hold tightened. Willie whimpered in pain. Red spots formed on his shirt from the sharp nails of the invisible fingers. A sudden tug, and Willie was dragged forward towards the mirror, his screams cut short by the shock of his body being pulled into the icy cold of the liquid glass. His muscles spasmed and his jaw snapped shut, nearly severing his tongue. With each tug, he felt the coldness grow until it enveloped him completely. Outside, the light flickered.
Thanks for your call, Larissa. Poor Dean. Talk about your buyer's remorse. But at least he and his family will have plenty of time for a little self-reflection. That's it for tonight's show, Groovy Ghoulies. But don't forget to like and subscribe. Let me know what you thought in the comments below, and also click that little bell icon so you'll know when the next show is out. As always, I'll be here waiting for the next 13th caller.